Black Myth Wukong has been the talk of the town in almost every gaming community and outlet ever since its release in a very positive way. And if you're the type to be overly cautious when it comes to paying for expensive games, you really shouldn't be. While browsing through many of the comments from a wide spectrum of players, you can see it ranges from jokes to serious discussion, yet you seldom hear much talk about it in a negative way, which has a lot of people questioning if it is actually good or if it's just an overhyped game like many games over the last few years. A lot of people seem to compare it to Dark Souls or Bloodborne, and in all honesty, it shouldn't be. While yes, it's got similar elements of combat, that's about it, while also being fully loaded with a lot of Chinese mythology and storytelling and many cinematic events, rather than say an extremely difficult game full of death everywhere that you turn. I can personally attest to the game's positive reception among players, and it's definitely on the list for Game of the Year, but before we talk about that, let me first address the negative issues that I and many others have with the game outside of the positives. The major flaws in Wukong would be the progression through the last chapter, which is Chapter 6, the controller configuration, which feels absolutely horrible when it comes to using your skills, taking medicine, and of course triggering certain effects. So at Chapter 6, the game does open into a very limited open world with very little direction, while the whole game and the remainder of the game is largely a linear straight line with about 70 to 100 bosses and secret bosses that you will most likely miss on your first playthrough. However, once you're here in Chapter 6, it's incredibly frustrating since it's like playing through the Shadow of Colossus without the sword's light effect, traveling aimlessly. So everything here in Wukong has to be found on your own at this point because there is no aid here. It doesn't tell you what you need to do, nor does it give you any prompts to go through to progress, and you can be here for about a couple hours confused or even looking up a guide, which is the only section of the game that I found myself needing to do for the sake of my sanity, as I've also heard from my friends and others. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it felt like the game was rushed for this segment, as it felt detached from everything else. It didn't ruin the rest of the game, but it did reduce the quality significantly, which I consider a genuine issue. Another issue would be the fact that the game would sometimes bug out, specifically for the Scorpion Lord and a few side quests, which was kinda disappointing having to play through a New Game Plus to take them on again or to complete the missed content. I would think that a lot of players play these games using controllers, but if you do prefer using a keyboard and mouse, this does not really apply to you. It's all down to personal preference. If you're playing on controller and you don't play a certain way, you will run into two distinct issues that make the gameplay frustrating or even outright unplayable. This would be the controllers need to have two bindings for sprinting and no way to rebind anything else as of currently. Utilizing the left analog button is my go-to for sprinting in a lot of games. I rarely ever use the right trigger, which is also connected to sprint. While yes, you do have two different types to choose from, using trigger buttons for your attack and rest for your skills, no matter which one you choose, you can't fix the most frustrating thing of all. All it takes is a millisecond slower on pressing right button and left button for your vessel powers to be skipped, which leaves you exposed, spinning your bow staff and not being able to apply the effect almost half of the time, or pressing the left analog button plus right bumper to activate your equipped effect, which can kill you regularly because it's just not a smooth transition, especially in boss fights. I would have loved to have the ability to simply set my vessel power as right trigger and my equipment on left trigger. I ended up having to press T and F on my keyboard, making it so much more simpler to activate each skill without having an unnecessary UI pop up in the middle of battle, which just felt like an eyesore. If you wanted to take your medicine while fighting, that was also another big issue because of the severe delay and chance that it would not activate. Opening up your inventory and taking each pill individually one by one was by far the best solution to this. And that about sums up the only issues that I actually have with this game, and they are very minimal at that. The whole game is true to the novel adaptation. For reference, I've never read or watched Journey to the West, and I can't say that I'm very knowledgeable about it. I'm more familiar with Japanese mythology than I am with Chinese mythology, so a lot of the background storytelling isn't very comprehensible or something that I feel like most or even I could truly understand or relate to unless we get some background about it ahead of time. In the most basic explanation of what the game showed through story, Sun Wukong is beaten by Erlang because of the circlet, which also binds him to the celestial rules and the eternal cycle. He is sealed away in a rock, and his legend continues on via those who are destined to carry on his legacy of gathering the relics spread across the world along with his remaining gear so that he might once again rise again through them, only to befall the same fate for countless centuries. I really can't say that I know a lot about the cultural traditions here, let alone most things like the story behind the golden circlet, though based on what I've heard from many of my friends who live in this type of culture, it appears to go into a lot of passionate detail without feeling disrespectful and true to the source material all the way through with no filler. For me, a lot of the story did fly over my head, but it's not really confusing because you don't really need to know anything about it to enjoy the rest of the base game. Just consider this to be a huge bonus if you are somebody who has read the book or watched the TV adaptation or even lived through this type of culture. It does a good job at explaining it in layman's terms for a very basic understanding. This is definitely more on the cinematic side of things when it comes to being absolutely stunning with all of the symbolic visuals with flyby camera perspectives from all the meditation areas around the world to the insane cinematic fights between Wukong and his enemies. The boss fights, the terrains, the monasteries, and most importantly the lighting in this game were beyond exceptional. You can find yourself taking on a boss only to have it disappear into the shadows, which behaves as shadows when the sun blinds your eyes or because the sandstorm has lowered your vision. This might lead you to lose track of their movements and their incoming skills, which can be very frustrating in a fantastic way. It's the first time I've seen a game use such a style of visual elements to enhance the gameplay and make it feel a bit bit more immersive and fresh rather than feeling recycled. Progressing through each chapter always felt wonderful, seeing several aspects, aside from chapter 6, like the music becoming more vocal and focused towards the spiritual level rather than being utilized just for boss fights or cinematic moments in full Chinese, which I thought was very pleasant. And that's saying something considering I don't usually like Chinese voices in most things that I watch and play, since they often feel very aggressive due to their tonal language, which I could never really understand well. I can't say that a lot of this was challenging, as combat was simply done in such a manner that you had to wait for a certain amount of time before being able to hit specific targets while playing it safe with your stamina, or you could just keep hitting with your stamina exhausted for less damage and slower reaction time, but it never felt that boring due to how dynamic it often was. Bosses tend to leap far away, especially when you're about to charge up a powerful swing for some, which forces you to focus solely on avoiding them with perfect dodges or rock-solid parries before striking them and staggering them here and there to do some massive damage. However, you may feel that that type of gameplay is excessively difficult, particularly for some bosses. At this point, you can make the experience much more simpler by using combination effects that can shred or kill almost any boss in the game with very minimal effort. Think of the combo system as something similar to the God of War titles, a lot of cool combo effects that can make your experience much more fluid and engaging. Though again, it's mostly about avoiding a lot of the skills and understanding the boss rotations. You can go absolutely nuts with your combo effects, stacking up tons of damage while weaving in and out of strikes with perfect dodges, which is just so much more thrilling. Getting everything down and praying that they don't randomize your rotations before phasing them. If you pay attention closely, there are plenty of secret bosses, interactions, and encounters that will reward you well, and some of these events can really surprise you. I kept getting the impression that the combat itself was very free, as it lets you have a lot of fun with the array of skills, armor, curios, and transformations that you can equip for yourself, and of course being able to reset your skills to try anything that you want as you level up without having to grind anymore. You can pretty much steamroll through 90% of the game, struggling only on the secret bosses and possibly the last 2 final bosses, even if you're not prepared. So some people may find it to be a little bit lacking when it comes to difficulty, but if you want to increase the difficulty of the game, you simply need to restrict yourself to basic strikes and things like rock-solid parries, to never using something like Flock of Many. I've been asked by many people if this game is truly worth the price. The simple answer would be yes. It is worth the money, since you'll be getting 40 to 50 hours of playtime or more for the base game itself if you're taking your time. Because for once, a game like this is functional, unlike many other games at this price from AAA developers. Though I have heard that a recent update had caused some crashing for a few friends and players, I can't really vouch for that personally. It functioned well enough for me with only a few small issues that a patch could very easily address. It was genuinely a fantastic experience that I want to see more from the developers, as Black Myth Wukong will undoubtedly win Game of the Year.